Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I hope everyone is well. Um, inshallah, let's go ahead and get started. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala rasulihi al-Kareem amma ba'd. So, welcome to today's seminar. Inshallah, we're going to be trying our best to cover as much as we possibly can. Today's seminar is one that I think is quite unique in the sense that I haven't really seen it covered with much rigor in at other institutions and other places. So hopefully you'll be able to benefit. And I ask Allah Subhanahu wa Taala to accept from all of us and allow all of us to benefit, inshallah. So let us go ahead and start in earnest. And I wanted to start with a challenge, and it's a 10-point challenge specifically. So here you go. And this is something that I want you to really think about and consider. Point number one in this challenge: take any 10 words in any language, right? Whatever language that you speak, whether it's Urdu or Hindi or whatever, Japanese or Spanish, any 10 words you like in any language, and then formulate them into 3 lines, or let's say 3 verses, and then add any particle that you feel fit, right? Linguistic particle that you think is good. So you've got these 10 words, you're going to put them in 3 lines or 3 verses. Number 2, the second point of the challenge: when you do this, when you construct it like this, extract from it at least, or include in this construct of yours at least 27 rhetorical devices and literary features. That's minimum, right? So if you're going to do more, okay, bismillah, go for it. The third point of this challenge: now you've got these 10 words, you've put them into 3 lines or 3 verses, you have placed within them at least 27 literary features or rhetorical devices. Now, at the same time, you want to make sure that what you've composed is timelessly meaningful, meaning it's not time bound. It is, as they say, transhistoric. So someone reading it 20 years from now would be able to benefit and understand it like someone reading it 20 years from now. So in other words, it is timelessly meaningful. It actually has proper meaning to it. But not only that, the third part of this challenge is that it fits in a larger piece of work, right? And that larger piece of work, that book or that dissertation or whatever it might be, numbers more than 27,000 words. So you have these 10 words, you put them into 3 lines. These 3 lines have at least 27 rhetorical device and literary features, and you've constructed all of that. You've put that all together in a structure that is meaningful both today, tomorrow, the day after, and it forms a small part of a larger work that is over 70,000 words, or 27,000 words, excuse me. Okay, now, not only that, we're not done yet. Point number 4, make sure that 4 of its words are unique and never used again in the book. So remember that 27,000 work that you have, that it forms a part of, you have 4 words that are used in this compilation of yours, in this composition of yours, 10 words. Out of those 10 words, 4 of those words are never used anywhere else in the entire dissertation, book, or whatever you want to call it, that spans more than 27,000 words. All right, 5th point. Not only all of that, as you compose this particular piece of writing, or let's say composition, you will need to make sure that every single line or every single verse that you put in there, remember there's 3, that they all end with a rhyme. But it's not that they're just rhyming, but remember, they have to be meaningful. And we're going to get into this in a little bit, why this is actually very challenging. Number 6, the words that you are using, all right? So make sure that these words are used only once in the 3 lines and not used anywhere else in the book. So those 4 words that we were just speaking about, they're used once in the 3 lines and not used anywhere else in the book. Okay, not only that, the 7th point in this 10-point challenge, these 3 lines that you've now composed with everything that we've just said, so they're made up of 10 words, those 10 words are meaningful. 4 of those words are not used anywhere else in the larger dissertation or writing that you have put together. That spans, remember, 27,000 words. Not only that, but in this particular piece of writing that you've put together, and as you divide this up into chapters or whatever you want to divide it up into, make sure that the chapter before, the chapter that precedes this compilation of yours, mirrors what you've written. So if you've written today it's going to be a great day, the chapter that comes before that, today is going to be a horrible day. I went to the marketplace. I returned back from the marketplace. So this is what we mean by mirroring. So now make sure that the chapter before it mirrors this particular chapter that you're composing. Not only that, though, to just have some fun and add something to the challenge, make sure that you're composing all of this based on an unplanned set of circumstances, meaning you do it right now without any sort of planning, without any sort of foresight, without even thinking about it. I want you to just come up with it immediately. Okay, number 8. And you think this would pretty much would be done now. The 8th point in this 10-point challenge. You've put these 10 words together, but now you must use, out of this compilation that you've put together, these 3 lines or verses, 10 words, part of a larger dissertation or book or whatever you want to call it, that's more than 27,000 words. Not only that, in this particular piece that you have put together, you must use 10 letters in each line and 10 letters only once in the entire 3 lines. In other words, those 10 letters that you use should not repeat in any of the 3 lines. Okay. Number 9. Not only you have to do all of this, what you need to do is to make sure you have a semantically orientated rhythm without sacrificing meaning. Because, you could put something together that has a certain rhythm, that flows and has a certain auditory sensation and auditory pleasure, but it is semantically bankrupt, right? The meaning that you have, in the sense that it's something that's meaningful, that's deep, and that touches the soul, it has to be semantically it has to be meaningful, right? It has to be semantically sound. Okay. Now, in this rhythm, don't sacrifice any meaning. Number 9. Here's what you're going to do. The 10th point of this 10-point challenge. You need to do all of this publicly, right? Not in the confines of your home, tapping away at your laptop or whatever it might be, but do it all publicly. You don't have a chance for revision. You can't go back and edit and, think about it and add a couple more words and so on and so forth. So you can't make any amendments, no revision. And we have to understand that you're not going to get any sort of training in eloquence or rhetoric. All right. How difficult do you think this challenge is? Now, if you were to ask me, I would say it's a very difficult challenge. In fact, I would say it's next to impossible to compose something like this with all of these 10 points, taking all of these 10 points into consideration. Today, what we're going to be looking at is none other than the shortest chapter or the shortest surah in the Quran, and that is Surah Al-Kawthar. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, بَعْدَ أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ إِنَّا أَعْطَيْنَاكَ الْكَوْثَرَ فَصَلِّ لِرَبِّكَ وَانْهَرْ إِنَّ شَانِئَكَ هُوَ الْأَبْتَرُ. And indeed, we have given you the abundance. So pray to your Lord and sacrifice. Indeed, your enemy is cut off. This particular chapter of the Quran, what we're going to be exploring today is we're going to be looking at some of the rhetorical devices within this chapter. We're going to be looking at some of the linguistic features of this chapter. But more than anything else, what we're going to hopefully marvel at is how all of these linguistic features and rhetorical devices come together in the form of a challenge, or in the form to meet a certain challenge. Now, keep in mind that when we say that this is the shortest chapter of the Quran, what we're referring to here, I want to make sure we're clear before we jump into this fully. The shortest chapter of the Quran, meaning that when you look at the number of words that are in this particular chapter, in fact, you may even be able to include the number of letters, you would find it has the least number of words. Okay, because there are other chapters of the Quran that have 3 ayat or 3 verses, right? Surah Al-Asr, wal Asr, inna al-insan lafi khusr, illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihat wa tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr. So there's 3 there as well. So anyway, so when we say it's the shortest chapter, it is the most concise in terms of its in terms of the number of words, the letters, and things like that. This is the shortest chapter in the entire Quran. So, what are we going to be looking at in our session today? Well, first of all, remember I said we're going to be looking at this not in the context of just being amazed, which inshallah I'm hoping that that will also come about as a byproduct, the wondrous nature of all of these features, but more so from the backdrop of it being a challenge. And we're going to look at how the Quran challenges its detractors with the various challenges that it has. We're also going to be looking at the particular linguistic environment that this surah comes down. And this is important because once you understand the environment, it actually adds to the difficulty of bringing something, a composition like this, about anyway. The third thing we're going to look at in this backdrop is the linguistic and literary authority and impact. Once you have the Quran, once you have this linguistic environment, we find that it's not that it comes to a certain linguistic environment and then it just stops. Rather, it itself starts to dictate and delineate how linguistic and literary how it should be projected outwards, in the sense that it's not only something that comes to a certain environment, but it also starts determining elements of that environment going outwards. And we'll look at that, inshallah, in this section of the backdrop. We'll look at the reason for revelation in terms of what's known as asbab nuzul, right? Or sabab nuzul here. In what context did it come down in? And then this is the meat of what we're going to be discussing, and that is the 27 linguistic literary features. And if we have time, because to be honest, as I was composing all of this and putting the slides together, this is going to be this is going to be a bit long. So if we have time, inshallah, we'll take some of your questions, bi'idhnillah. So let us go ahead and begin in the beginning. So now, before we get to the backdrop, I think it's important for us to make what we're going to be speaking about relevant to English speakers. Reason being is because a lot of times you think that a discussion that's happening in Arabic, I don't speak Arabic, I'm not familiar with the Arabic language, and so therefore I can't benefit at all. And I think that's a faux pas. I think that's a mistake. When we speak about things like rhetorical devices, we understand that languages across the board make use of rhetorical devices. So, for instance, it was some survey mentioned that the most iconic one-liner in all of cinematic history was what you see on the screen right now, right? The phrase Bond, James Bond. Now, if you really think about it for a second, you'll find that this particular phrase doesn't have any sort of pearls of wisdom. It's not giving you some sort of remarkable information. In fact, the author of the books that the James Bond movies are based upon, Ian Fleming, he actually said, I chose a name that was one that would be that attracted the least amount of attention. In other words, I wanted the events around the character to be the focus and not the person, not the character himself. So he chose the most bland, boring name that he could possibly think of. So he chooses James Bond. So there's nothing remarkable about the name. However, something about this name, something about how it's stated, it brings about a certain type of feeling within a person. There's a certain there's a certain kind of internal association that you have when someone says Bond, James Bond, and in fact, it goes and it's on a certain it makes use of a certain rhetorical device, which is known as a diacope. A diacope is a rhetorical device that's on the form ABA. So other diacopes would be things like burn, baby, burn, right? Home, sweet home. For some reason, when you put it in this particular format, it adds something to it. it brings something more than just someone stating their name. And so this particular formulation, it's very different than someone walking in the room and saying, "Hello, my name is James Bond," or "Hello, first name James, last name Bond." But no, something about the fact that when you say Bond, James Bond, it just has a certain ring to it. And this goes back to rhetorical devices. And in fact, there's many rhetorical devices. There's a good book, if you're interested, that kind of ties or elucidates rhetorical devices in the English language. That is a relatively easy read. It's by Mark Forsyth, and I'm trying to remember. I think it's called "The Art of Persuasion" or something like that. It's something to do with rhetorical devices, and the title's escaping me right now. Um, but he talks about these rhetorical devices, diacopes, and other rhetorical devices. So we find rhetorical devices across other languages. And if you speak other languages, you'll be able to identify rhetorical devices in your own language, something that transcends the simple meaning of the phrase. And this can be further elucidated when we think about the difference between poetry and prose. And again, we're going to stick with the English language because there's something about poetry that it has some sort of an aesthetic appeal to it, such that you cannot translate the poem, okay? And such that when it comes to this additional element, it has to do with the beauty of how the words come together and not hyper focused on the content, okay? Prose, on one hand, focuses heavily on content. It's trying to get you information in the most effective way possible. So if you think about something like an organic chemistry textbook, okay? An organic chemistry textbook is something that you're going to read, you're going to study for your exam, and then you're never going to revisit it, most likely, okay? You're going to extract the information, whatever you need, and then that's it, you're done. You will never come to an organic chemistry, or rarely, unless you're maybe one of those types of people, come to organic chemistry and be like, I love reading this book. It's just so meaningful. Every time I read it, it just takes me to, cloud nine. Whereas if you look at a poem is quite different, because a poem, what it does is it not only gives you content, or it places content in a certain structure such that when you visit it and then revisit it, you have a yearning to revisit it, because every time you read it, it gives you a certain sense within inside of yourself. So if you look at this poem by Emily Dickinson, for example, she writes, "Hope is the thing with feathers." And I want you to kind of think about this for a second and let it sink in. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without words and never stops at all. It's actually very beautiful when you think about the concept of hope. And she continues and she says um, that and sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. Think about when you need hope, when you are going through the most like the most terrible times in your life, and that's when hope comes in. And she's describing it like this bird. It's very beautiful. And then she continues and says, "I've heard it in the chilliest land and the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me." So you notice there's a rhyme, there's a rhythm, and there's meaning, and you want to revisit it, and it brings a certain feeling to you when you really internalize and think about poetry. Okay. Now, one of the interesting aspects about poetry, however, is that the rigor of an organic chemistry textbook rarely can be captured in the form of a poem, right? Because remember, in prose, the objective is to give you the information in the most effective way possible. So its focus is efficacy. Whereas in a poem, while it's delivering information, the focus is not necessarily efficacy per se, but the focus is again generating or having that appreciation of the beauty and the meaning behind the words that are being written for you to visit it and revisit it. So we find this phenomenon prevalent in any language. And we understand things like rhetorical devices, rhetoric. In Arabic, this concept is known as balagha, right? The concept of rhetorical devices and how they're used efficiently and so on. And we understand when it comes to the Quran that it is at the apex of prose and the apex of poetry, such that it is a unique genre in and of itself. And we're going to see that as we move forward, bi'idhnillah ta'ala. Now, all I'm speaking about today, what I'm going to be discussing today, it's based on an article that has been written by Hamza Zortzis. You can find it on the Sapiens Institute site on the link that's there on the screen. I'm going to highly urge you to, after you're done with this session, after we're done with this particular seminar, to go and take a look at the essay and read it and think about it and internalize it, right? Because the essay, obviously, there's more that can be stated in the essay. The essay has references, so you know a lot of the stuff we're not just making up, and it has a certain degree of academic rigor, which I think is very beneficial for a person that's interested in the topic. So again, the essay, you can find it at sapiensinstitute.org. It's free. Download it, read it, and engage with it, inshallah. So let us start with the backdrop, and under the backdrop, we're going to start with the challenge. So, what is the challenge exactly? Well, the challenge that's stated, or that the Quran brings forth, is that this Quran is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then there are challenges that are part and parcel of the Quran and the claim that this Quran is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? Part of that challenge has to do with imitating or emulating the Quran. All right? So the failure of anyone to imitate the Quran developed into the Muslim theological doctrine of the Quran's inimitability, which is called al-ijazul Quran. So this entire concept of the Quran someone not being able to imitate it or emulate it developed into a whole science and a whole subject area, a whole domain, and this domain is called al-i'jaz al-Quran. Now, why do they call it i'jaz al-Quran? I'jaz, it's a verbal noun. It's a masdar. For those of you studying Arabic, for those of you studying English, it's a verbal noun. So it's a noun that is related to an action. The technical term in English grammar, if you are interested, is a gerund. I don't know why they called it that. I think verbal nouns has a better descriptive. So is a better description of what a masdar is. So the word ijaz is a verbal noun that means miraculousness, which I'm going to stop here for a second because I'm not sure if I quite agree with exactly how this is stated, but we'll stay with it as is for now. So the word ijaz is a verbal noun that means miraculousness and comes from the word ajaza. Now, ajaza, what this term means is to render something incapable. It's to incapacitate. It's to make impotent. And all of these ideas comes from ajaza. So ajaza yujizu i'jazan. It's to basically render something incapable. Okay? The linguistic meaning of the term brings to light the theological doctrine that Arab linguists par excellence were rendered incapable of producing anything like it. Now, that is the challenge in brief. However, and this gets to where I was talking about when we use the English word miracle and we assume that i'jaz, it's the same thing. A translation of i'jaz is miracle and vice versa. I think this becomes a bit problematic because it takes away from what i'jaz really is when we talk about al-i'jaz al-Quran. How so? Well, first of all, one of the components of the i'jaz is what's known as a tahaddi. It's a challenge. It is challenging a person. When you think about the term miracle in English, think about how we use it in our common vernacular. We could use it for something, let's say, supernatural, right? Like a miracle from God, but we use it in other contexts as well. And that's perfectly acceptable, like the miracle of a childbirth or the miracle of the sunrise. But those particular things are not necessarily something that breaks the supernatural order. Nor is the observation of those things, even as wondrous and as amazing as they may be, that also does not necessitate or include the idea of a challenge being brought forth. And so that's where the concept of i'jaz is a bit different than the concept of a miracle as we understand it in the English language. Because again, in the English language, it could have that it could have that linguistic space to say it's a supernatural miracle, but yet it could be used in other areas as well, which are not necessarily against that which is supernatural. Secondly, the concept of a miracle in English doesn't have within it the concept of challenging something. I'jaz, however, does do this. So what I wanted to look at is some of the conditions of what would be considered a mu'jiza in terms of the Islamic paradigm, how we define what a mu'jiza is. Now, i'jaz is the concept, right? When we talk about i'jaz, that which incapacitates, and the mu'jiza is the actual action, the thing that's being referred to here, right? The mu'jiza. This mu'jiza, we can say, has a few conditions. In order for us to consider an i'jaz or a mu'jiza, it has a few conditions. Now, let me stop here for a second. These particular conditions are not what you may call taxonomically married to them. In other words, these are 6 conditions that someone could, as they go through the Quran and the Sunnah, take out and extract. You may say that they may be categorized differently, so it's not a cut and dry taxonomical domain that you cannot leave. In other words, it could be 6, it could be 7, it could be 8, there could be more. But generally, because I wanted to highlight the point of i'jaz to be tied with the concept of a tahaddi, a challenge, these conditions seemed like it would be good to bring forth, so it elucidates the point. It makes clear for us how, when we just say miracle, it doesn't really do the concept of i'jaz justice. So the conditions of a mu'jiza in the Islamic paradigm. Number 1, it has to occur with the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's, I think, pretty straightforward and pretty obvious. It has to be out of the ordinary occurrences of nature. So, as we mentioned earlier, people can use the word miracle in many different contexts, and some of those don't necessitate the breaking of a natural, a natural stream of events, right? So there's no breaking in causal links, for instance. Whereas when it comes to a mu'jiza, it has to be outside of that sort of occurrence that happens within the natural world. Okay. And by the way, just on an interesting side point here, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he speaks about how there are, let's say, causal links within nature, and there's, let's say, causal antecedents, like X causes Y causes Z, this is part of what you would say is is part of the natural world itself, how things occur naturally. And so how science is able to work, it makes predictions, not predictions, but it makes assumptions that nature is uniform. Okay. When this prediction breaks down, right? Or sorry, not this prediction, when this, let's say, first principle, this axiom, this basic belief breaks down, this is where it runs antagonist to nature. In the Quran, when Allah refers to these type of things, that process is related to the word amr. And the process where things occur naturally is the word khalq. So when you read the word khalq, so let me stop here for a second. Let's say the creative concept of something coming into being from nothing. That's creation ex nihilo, or nihilo. Not sure how to pronounce that properly. But anyhow, basically creating out of nothing, that creation out of nothing, it is specified to amr, and it could be a part of khalq, or it could be, or it could be, like the concept of khalq or khalaqa is much broader than the concept of amr. Amr specifically relates to those things that either break the natural chain of events or where you have a starting point. So if you think of breaking the natural chain of events, when a child is born, that's part of the natural chain of events, right? You have a couple, they come together, woman gets pregnant, she gives birth. Khalas. That is part of khalaq, right? That is how Allah created things. That's a natural chain of events. There are causal links there, right? There's a causal order and so on. However, when you think about Isa alayhi salam and the birth of Isa, now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to this as an amr. So that's why it says, إِذَا قَضَى أَمْرًا فَإِنَّمَا يَقُولُ لَهُ كُن فَيَكُونُ. That when we decree a matter, we say to it, kun fayakun, right? So when we decree a matter, an amr, and so on and so forth. So the soul is related to this. Anyhow, it's a bit of a long tangent. I should probably come back to where we're going. So Coming back to the mu'jiza, it has to be out of the ordinary occurrences of nature. Number three, it cannot be performed again by any person or object. So it's not something that you can just repeat over and over again. Okay. And I want us to think about not only in the context of the Quran, but in the context of miracle or not miracles, i'jaz in general, right? Those things that we call mu'jizat in general. So if you think about the mu'jizat that, or the mu'jiza, or one of the mu'jizat that Musa alayhi salam brings, well, you have magicians, his staff actually turns into a stick. Whereas the magicians, they're working with optical illusions and all sorts of other things that they can use the natural occurrences or the occurrences of nature and bring that about. Musa alayhi salam brings something to break that. And so he throws the stick down, it actually becomes a snake. Third point, no one else can perform it. No one else can repeat it. Okay, number four, it must be at the hands of a person who claims prophethood. Again, very important, right? There is a teleos here. There's a purpose to the i'jaz, right? This challenge, this tahaddi, it comes with a purpose. It's not just meaningless things that just happen to just be, right? But it comes as a challenge. And this, again, I'm stressing this over and over again because it's important that we understand the difference between a miracle and, in the English, a miracle and i'jaz. Okay, the act must match the claim of the prophet. Okay, so if the prophet comes now, let's say Musa alayhi salam comes now and says, my staff will turn into a snake, he throws it down and turns into a donkey. Okay, well, that is not a mu'jiza. Okay, sixth point, the act must not refute the prophet's claim. So if like someone claims to be a prophet and they say that any person who dies with a stomach disease is a liar, and then they die of a stomach disease. Okay, well, this is, again, the act itself, and again, this might not be quite right because it doesn't break the ordinary occurrences of nature, but you get what I'm saying. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because there was a person who claimed prophethood, and that actually happened to him out of the subcontinent, the Indian subcontinent. For those who know, and basically this gentleman claimed or said, I shouldn't say gentleman, but this person claimed that whoever dies of a stomach disease has died a liar or something to this effect. And sure enough, he dies, in his bathroom, Elvis style. Anyhow, so the sixth point, it must not refute the prophet's claim. So now that we've understood the link between i'jaz and a tahaddi, that we find that part and parcel of an i'jaz or the i'jaz of the Quran is to bring a challenge, to challenge someone to say, okay, do something like it. Convert the staff into a snake. Make a bird out of clay and breathe into it and have it fly away. Whatever it might be, whatever that i'jaz, and the i'jaz of the Quran is no different. Okay, now I want to stop here for a second. Specifically with the i'jaz of the Quran, there's something we need to speak about, and that is epistemic valuation. When we decide on how truthful something is, or how false something is, we generally work in terms of probability. Like, there are elements and there are ideas that we're certain about, and there are ideas that when we become exposed to them, we have to make a decision about those occurrences. Okay, so most of those things are what we call probabilistic, right? In Arabic, they're called dhanni. And once you start stacking more and more evidence, your probabilistic reasoning gets to the point of becoming definitive, qat'i. Okay, so and we do this all the time. So for instance, if you think about how a doctor is able to make a prognosis, so he has to make a diagnosis first and say, okay, well, here are, let's say, 5 different things that are wrong with this person. They've got heart disease, they've got this, they've got diabetes, whatever it might be, based on these particular symptoms this person has. The diagnosis states that they have these particular symptoms. It is most likely that they have X disease. Okay, but they're still working on probability. Now, they could run a test and say, okay, I am 63% sure that this is the disease this person has. All right, now they run a few more tests. Oh, hold on a second. More information has come. Now certainty is has risen up 66%, more evidence 71%, 83%, 92%, and so on and so forth. Okay, we do this in our lives as well. When we think about, how we weigh out options, when we make inferences, and we take explanations and we try to choose the best explanation. When you are, let's say, sitting in traffic, and you look and you see that the red lights that are, the lights that are in front of you way down the road are blinking red, right? So at least, and this may be a very Americentric example, but what happens is that means that generally it means that the traffic light is broken. Now, your assumption could be, you're saying, you know what, most likely the traffic light is broken after having seen the red and it blinks once. However, once you see it blink again, now your probability, you're saying, hold on a second, it's blinked twice. Okay, that means the light is broken. It blinks another time. So now your level of certainty is going up. Not only that, but as you get closer to the light, you start seeing that, okay, people are stopping and going and the light is not functioning. The more evidence that you build, or the more evidence you add, the more certain you get. And this is probabilistic reasoning that gets to be something that's definitive. Why am I mentioning this? Because when it comes to the context of the Qur'an, and specifically the context of, or when we're speaking about Surah Al-Kawthar, you're going to see that there's let's say we present a certain rhetorical device. And you can make an assumption like, okay, this, most likely, like a person could do that. A person could emulate that. But then you add another rhetorical device. So now your state of being in a state of dhann, right? Your dhanni reasoning, it's getting weaker. So as you add another piece of evidence, right? Let's say a literary feature, now your doubt is going lower and lower. So it's moving, your doubt is moving from 37 to 34%. Okay, then 29%. At a certain point, there are so many layers that are stacked, so many layers of evidence that get stacked, that you have to come to the conclusion that no, this is, there's no way to meet this challenge, and indeed this is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It moves from a state of being dhanni to a state of being qat'i. Like there's no doubt about it now whatsoever. Why I'm bringing this up is because as we go through the 27 literary and linguistic features that we're going to be speaking about, this is the backdrop I'd like you to keep in your mind. Because with every single feature, you have to ask yourself, how likely is that? Like, how could someone, based on the asbab nuzul, based on the circumstance that they're in, based on the conditions that we're presenting, how could this be replicated? How could this be emulated, right? Is it truly inimitable? Okay, let's move on. So what is the challenge? Imam as-Suyuti, rahimahullah, he outlines all of this. I don't know if I want to read all of it, but he basically outlines the ayat that bring the challenge forth. So I'm not gonna read all of this. You can find this in the article, the entire paragraph. But in summary, he quotes certain ayat of the Quran which bring forth a challenge. So one of those ayat that he quotes is in chapter 52, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, let them produce a recitation similar to it if indeed they are truthful. فَلْيَأْتُوا بِحَدِيثٍ مِثْلِ إِنْ كَانُوا صَادِقِينَ. Let them produce a recitation, a hadith, a speech that is like it if indeed they are truthful. So in other words, bring a Quran like it, okay? Imam as-Suyuti quotes another verse and another ayah. And in this verse, in the 11th chapter, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, Am yaqulun aftara, or do they say that he invented it? Qul, say to them, Fa'tu bi ashri surim mithli. And so bring 10 chapters like it, muftarayat, that have been invented. And this is actually important. I may touch upon this. Wad'u and call min istata'tum min dunillah, those whomever you can besides Allah that can help you, in kuntum sadiqin, if indeed you are truthful. All right, so now it's bring a Quran like it, bring a hadith like it, bring like a composition like it. It moves down. All right, bring 10 chapters like it. Just do 10, man. You know, you don't have to bring the full composition. Then it moves on and says, and then in the 10th surah, in the 10th chapter of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts off very similarly. Am yaquluna iftara. Qul. Okay. Or do they say that he invented it? He came up with it. It was just a thing that he just made up, right? It's not real. It just made up with it. Just came up with it on his own, right? Iftara. So qul fa'tu bi suratim mithli. Okay, then bring forth a surah, one surah like it. وَادْعُوا مِنَ اسْتَطَعْتُم مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ, and call whoever you want, you can besides Allah, in kuntum sadiqeen. So it went from bringing a full hadith, a full composition like it, right? And remember, we said that the Qur'an is over 27,000 words. So, okay, bring something like that. If you can't bring that, okay, 10 surahs. Okay, you can't bring that, bring one. Now, at this point, I want to stop for a second and have us reflect upon the overall topic. We are going to now talk about this challenge not from a surah that is like quite long. We're not going to be looking at Surah Al-Baqarah, for instance. We're not going to be looking at Surah Al-Mulk, right? We're going to be looking at the shortest chapter, the shortest surah in the Quran, with the intuitive understanding that a short chapter, a short composition should be easier. It's only 3 lines, man. So if that's the case, you should be able to meet this challenge with no problem whatsoever. Okay. Now I'm going to pause here for a second and add another, since we are going to be starting and speaking about rhetorical devices and linguistic and literary features. What I find interesting about how this challenge is set up is that how the challenge is set up in the ayat that are used themselves have literary features to them, which themselves, when you start to place and you start to understand how could a person have put this together and have the type of uh, could a person have put this together and be as precise as the author of whoever put this together. Okay, now what do I mean? In Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in relation to this in this challenge as well, again, going back to one surah like it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِن كُنْتُمْ فِي رَيْبٍ مِّمَّا نَزَّلْنَا عَلَىٰ عَبْدِنَا فَأْتُوا بِسُورَةٍ مِّن مِّثْلِ وَادْعُوا شُهَدَاءَكُم مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ إِن كُنْتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. If you're in doubt about what we have sent down upon our servant, the Prophet Muhammad, in other words, then produce a surah the like thereof and call upon your witnesses other than Allah. Now, a casual reading of these surahs, here it's saying bring a surah, in I think it's Surah Hud or the 10th chapter, Am yaquluna aftara, qul fa'tu bi suratin mithli. All right, has he invented it? Do they say has he invented it? All right, say bring forth a surah like it. You wouldn't really think that there's much difference between these two verses. However, what's of interest here is that in this surah, right, and also when he talks about the 10 surahs, what you'll notice is am yaquluna iftara, or do they say about the Prophet that he invented it? Qul fa'tu bi suratim mithli, and say bring a surah like it. Now I want to highlight suratim mithli right here in between the ta marbuta and the meme. There's a shadda there for those of you who are studying Arabic. In Surah Al-Baqarah, what is said? Fa'tu bi suratim mim mithli. So bring a surah, and there's an extra min here. Okay, lesh. Like, why is there? What's the significance here? Like, why? Like, if this is truly from Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, and there is nothing that's done without intentionality. In other words, every word, every letter is placed with a full intention from the divine. Then why is it in this case there's no min, and in this case there is a min? Well, and this actually, again, it goes back to the literary feature. When we look at the context, the siyaq of this particular ayah, we notice it starts off am yaquluna iftara, all right, that has he invented it. Now, fa'tu bi suratim mithli, bring a surah like it, all right, and call to your assistance wherever it may be. In the ayah before this, when he talks about 10, he said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Am yaquluna iftara qul fa'tu bi ashri mithli sur mithli muftayat. And here is the important word. The context of both this one and this one is there's an iftira. They're saying that he invented it. So Allah is saying that this invention, this hypothetical invention, that if it's that easy and your assumptions are true, it's all based on assumption, then bring a surah like it. However, when Allah is speaking Surah Al-Baqarah, the context is not has he invented this? Is there this hypothetical thing that can come about? Is there an assumption? Rather, it moves from assumption to reality. And that's why it is signified mimithli, from this, right? So in kuntum fi raybin mimma nazalna ala abdina. So if you're in doubt about what we've sent down to our messenger, sent down to our servant, bring a surah mimithli. In other words, like this particular Qur'an, this reality, this Qur'an that is being read, that is real, not a hypothetical, not something that's invented and hypothetical. The min is added to stress that. Now, what adds to this is the very next ayah. But if you do not, فَإِلَّمْ تَفْعَلُوا وَلَنْ تَفْعَلُوا, if you do not, and you will never be able to do so. Why? Because in this case, they're not talking about iftira, like something that just invented, that's just made up, but rather talking about a reality. And it's not juxtaposing with the claim that the kuffar are making against the Prophet ﷺ or against the Quran here. So anyway, so that's just a minor feature, minor linguistic, minor literary feature, is the difference in why Allah uses min here, signifying not a hypothetical or not an assumed claim, right? And even, by the way, the assumed claim is put to rest, as we're going to do in a few minutes, bi'idhnillah. Okay, that being the case, so we understand the challenge. Let's briefly now look at the linguistic environment, because I'm running a bit short of time. Linguistic environment. What was the linguistic environment of the Arabs of the time? We have here some quotes speaking about the fact that when it came to the environment that the Arabs were in, when it came to the socio-political and I would say even economic environment, you find language is front and center. Eloquence, the idea of linguistic prowess, having this ability is front and center and is the thing that basically life revolves around. Okay, and so that's why the scholar Taqiyuddin Usmani, he mentions that eloquence and rhetoric were their lifeblood. You breathed, slept, ate, were surrounded by, took in, and put out this linguistic enormity, right, of just the environment that you're in. Jumahi mentions, verse was to the Arabs the register of all they knew and the utmost compass of their wisdom. With it they began their affairs, and with it they ended them. Furthermore, related to this linguistic environment, Ibn Khaldun, who, as you know, is a historian, some say a sociologist, some say the first economist. There's various appellages that have been applied to him, various descriptions. So he testifies, the 14th century scholar and historian, and perhaps by some regards a polymath. He says that it should be known that Arabs thought highly of poetry as a form of speech. Therefore, they made it the archives of their history, the evidence for what they considered right and wrong, and the principal basis of reference for most of their sciences and wisdom. Okay, moving forward, Ibn Rashiq mentions, whenever a poet emerged, and I love this quote, whenever a poet emerged in an Arab tribe, other tribes would come to congratulate, feasts would be prepared, women would join together on lutes as they did at weddings, and old and young men would all rejoice at the good news. The Arabs used to congratulate each other only on the birth of a child and when a poet rose amongst them. So you would have like a major party, right? Like, hey, you know what? Guess what? My son graduated from medical school, and I'm trying to contemporize the example, but that sort of environment is what we're speaking about when we're talking about the environment that the Quran is coming down to. Why is this important as a backdrop? Because remember, we are talking about a tahaddi, a challenge. And when we're speaking about a challenge and we talk about i'jaz, the i'jaz comes as a challenge, and it comes to a challenge that the people or the environment is dictating that it is supreme. It is at its apex. Okay. So if you think about the time of Musa alayhi salam, you had magic at its apex. People were known to be connoisseurs of magic. They could, they understood magic extremely well, and so on. Okay. And so he brings something that completely decimates their entire conceptualization of magic by breaking the order, the staff that becomes an actual snake. Similarly, Isa alayhi salam, when he's making a clay bird and he breathes into it, alayhi salam, and it becomes a bird. Now, this concept of life, you had people that were medical practitioners of his time, and they were at the height, they were at the apex of their fields. They couldn't replicate that. So it comes as a challenge. Go for it, replicate it, do it. Here, we're talking about a linguistic environment. And I'm going to tell you something that I think is extremely fascinating. If you think about why Allah chose language as the trans-historic vehicle to bring the i'jaz forward, it's actually quite phenomenal. Because when we think about a challenge, language is something that's at the core of the human project. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ar-Rahman, Allama al-Qur'an, Khalaq al-Insan, Allamahu al-Bayan, right? Ar-Rahman, the merciful. This is the highest, kind of one of the greatest names of Allah, one of the greatest attributes of Allah is mercy. If Allah, was not merciful even for a second, you would perish. You and I would not be around, right? So mercy, Ar-Rahman, Allama al-Qur'an, the best and the highest, the greatest of all, let's say, scriptures, the Quran, right? Khalaq al-insan, the best of creation out of everything that's been created, and that is at the highest state, is the human being. Allamahul bayan. It is bayan, it is speech that distinguishes this particular creation from everything else, right? And if you think about it, when we speak, we can do things with speech that no other animal, no other creation can do, right? So when you think about phonemes, for instance, how we take certain sounds, alif, lam, mim, a, la, ma, and we put them together to form words. Just as an example, as human beings, we can do something known as doubling. We can double something, right? So for those of you who are studying Arabic, you can do a shadda, right? Rabbikum, right? You can do the doubling, or whatever it might be. This doubling, no other creature can do that. Now, not only that, no other animal can have a limited set of grammatical tools and be able to generate infinite structures of speech, right? So if I said to you, today I'm going to get on a United flight and fly to Istanbul, and in Istanbul there's a spaceship that's waiting for me. I'm going to board the spaceship. It's going to take me to the moon. On the moon, I'm going to get off. I'm going to order some McDonald's because they've opened a McDonald's on the moon. And after I eat, I'm going to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I'm going to pray Salat al-Dhuhr on the moon. This phrase, this entire passage that I just quoted, I'm pretty sure you've never heard it in your life before. I've never spoken it in my life before. So we have a limited number of words. Our vocabulary is limited, and the grammatical structures are limited. Yet, from very early on, children can generate this speech. If we were to think about life just in terms of material matter, how is it we're able to do this? And it is language that allows us to transcend, or language is that which allows us to actually gain knowledge way more than just firsthand experience. And here we're talking about testimonial knowledge. You can read the writing of something else and someone else did, and you can have technological explosions that happen. Okay? All of this is based purely on language. And language is the means by which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is making the challenge, because it's accessible to every person, and every person, right, compared to all of creation, is better than all of creation at language, right? Okay, so that's a kind of a side point. Now, just like we said that the environment that the Quran comes to is the environment that's suited for it, in other words, as a challenge to the linguistic prowess and the linguistic abilities of the Arabs of their time. Not only does that happen, but the Quran makes a mark on how linguistics and literature is now understood and made normative. Okay, now what do I mean by that? What I'm saying is there's a big discussion in terms of language. Is there such a thing as normative language? Like if I said, is there such thing as normative English? Is there a correct way of speaking English? And if there is, who determines that? If there is a correct way of speaking English and someone, let's say, is raised in the hood, has an urban upbringing, right? And they speak differently. They say the word ask, and if you're from New York, you say ax. You don't. You actually switch the K and the S. Okay. Now you might say, well, that's wrong. Wait a minute, but who has the authority to say that this is wrong? Who has the authority to say this is correct English and this is incorrect English? Who makes the standard to say this is normative and this is anti-normative English? There is no language where this is a settled issue, that there is a correct way. If you think about Urdu, if you go back 200 years and start to read a book in Urdu, most of it would be lost. There is always going to be linguistic change over time. But is that linguistic change degenerative, or is it simply a change over time, right? Is it simply something that just mutates, it's just mutable over time, and we cannot give a valuation, correct or not correct, and so therefore we can't say languages degenerate? Or there's a standard. There's no language where this has become a settled matter, with the exception of the Arabic language. Only the Arabic language, and I would say even Hebrew, can't do this. And there's many reasons for this. Because of the period of Hellenization, they translated certain texts into Greek and so on. And the concepts of dictionaries they borrowed from later on, so that many of the meanings were lost. Whole range of things. So even Hebrew can't compete. Arabic is the only language that you can say there's a normative, correct, fasih way of speaking, reading, writing the language itself. And anything that moves away from that is anti-normative. It's not the correct way of doing it. Arabic is the only language like that. Why is that the case? Because of the impact of the Quran. And that's basically what this section talks about. So I'll quote one thing here by Wadad Kadi and Muntasir Mir. They state, although Arabic as a language and a literary tradition was quite well developed by the time of Muhammad's prophetic activity, it was only after the emergence of Islam, with its founding scripture in Arabic, that the language reached its utmost capacity of expression, and the literature its highest point of complexity and sophistication. Indeed, it is probably no exaggeration, and this is the take-home point, no exaggeration to say that the Quran was one of the most conspicuous forces in the making of classical and post-classical Arabic literature. And what I would add to this and say, it then gives Arabic a standard. There are grammatical standards you meet. There are morphological standards you meet. There are rhetorical standards that you meet that come from the Quran. So the Quran comes in a certain linguistic environment, but then it shapes what comes after it. And this is truly something that's phenomenal. Okay. Now, quickly, we need to get to the sabab al-nuzul. What is the reason for revelation? Where did this surah come down? Where did Surah Al-Kawthar, under what set of circumstances did it come down? Now, the set of circumstances, and in the Tafsir al-Jalalain, it states that this particular surah was revealed regarding Al-As ibn Wa'il. Okay? Now, when the Prophet's son passed away, Al-Qasim, okay? So by the way, the Prophet ﷺ was known as Abu al-Qasim. So when you read certain hadith, that was his patronymic. That's how he was referred to. That was his kunya, Abu al-Qasim, or one of his kunyas, Abu al-Qasim. Why? Because he had a son, Qasim. Now, I want you to think about this for a second. A person's son dies. This is a point where you would probably be at a very low point, right? Because your son, your young son has now died. Maybe you had certain dreams and ambitions and hopes that this son would do X, Y, and Z as he grow up. They'll be a doctor, a scholar, and this. And think about that. Put yourself in this scenario. Now, your son dies, and you have, a wretched person that comes to you and says you have been cut off. Abatar, right? And what are you going to think? Because you see, the general milieu at the time was such that if a person had a son, uh, this was an indication of great honor, because the son would take over. The son would, move forward in terms of, let's say, leadership positions. The son would do this and the son would do that. Now, here comes the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he is making a claim to prophethood. And this claim of prophethood is eating away at the kuffar, at many of the Quraysh. They are basically saying, here he has come to the claim of prophethood. This is hurting us economically. This is breaking up families. This is having political ramifications. All of these things. His son dies. And so this wretched man, Al-As ibn Wa'il, comes and says, ha ha, you've been cut off. You don't have, there's no progeny to move forward. Like that male progeny that's going to take and give you honor and give you all of these things, you're completely cut off. How despondent would you and I be, right? If that's what we understood, if our worldview was such that it dictated, or it was informed by the idea that a son is something of great honor, and if I lose my son, there's the pain of losing my son, and then there's the idea that this is somehow indicative of Allah not favoring me. Okay, because that's essentially what they're talking about. That's what Al-As ibn Wa'il is talking about. Okay, so the ayah, the surah Al-Kawthar comes after this incident, right? Where Al-As ibn Wa'il says to the Prophet ﷺ, you are cut off, you're abatar. Okay, now there are other people that denigrated the Prophet ﷺ as well. It wasn't just limited to Al-As ibn Wa'il. You had Uqba ibn Mu'ayt, right? He was someone that denigrated the Prophet ﷺ. You had Ka'b ibn al-Ashraf, all right? He was the Jewish man in Medina that, was very problematic. And he denigrated the Prophet ﷺ. Of course, Abu Lahab, who's mentioned in the Qur'an, denigrated the Prophet ﷺ. So many of these people denigrated the Prophet ﷺ. Now, what's interesting is that after this happens, the Prophet ﷺ, even though he was suffering and he's feeling down, and anyone after a loss of a son would feel terrible, after a certain point, he has his head in his hands and in his lap. He gets up after a nap and he's smiling. So the companions see this, say, Ya Rasulullah, why are you smiling? And the Prophet ﷺ says that just now this chapter has been revealed to me. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Inna a'tainaka al-kawthar. Fasalli li rabbika wanhar. Inna shani'aka huwa al-abtar. Right? And so, in the name of the most gracious, the most merciful, verily we have granted you al-Kawthar. Therefore, turn in prayer to your Lord and sacrifice to him. For he who hates you, he will be the one that's cut off. Okay? Now, it's interesting. I've got a note down there. It says the power of these three lines was able to change the perspective from focusing on what was taken away from the Prophet ﷺ, his son, to what was given to the Prophet ﷺ. So this shift now comes by way of the surah. Okay, it was able to transform the emotions associated with loss and suffering into emotions that caused the Prophet ﷺ to smile. Okay, so as we're going through some of the the rhetorical devices, the literary and linguistic features, we have to keep this backdrop in mind, because they are, just like there are internal realities or internal features, those internal features relate to what's going on outside of the particular surah. And so this context, this sabab, this reason for revelation becomes extremely important as we venture through the 27, and inshallah, hopefully I get through all of them, 27 rhetorical devices and literary and linguistic features, inshallah. So let us go ahead and move forward with that. And I'll try to be somewhat brief, but also give you a full, as much as I can, the full flavor of these linguistic and literary features. Again, I'm going to encourage you to take a proactive approach and read the article itself, because I may not be able to do justice to each and every single one of these features, but I believe that what's been written does a pretty good job, a very good job in the English language, expounding upon these 27 linguistic and literary features, which, by the way, I don't think it's limited to 27. It's just 27 is what was covered in the article. Okay, let's move on. So, Surah Al-Kawthar, very briefly, I've recited it a few times. بَعْدَ أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ إِنَّا أَعْطَيْنَاكَ الْكَوْثَرَ فَصَلِّ لِرَبِّكَ وَانْهَرْ إِنَّ شَانِئَكَ هُوَ الْأَبْتَرُ. So indeed we have given you the abundance, so pray to your Lord and sacrifice. Indeed your enemy is cut off. Now, this is the surah itself. We've got the Arabic here, the English as well on the side, and we've also got a transliteration there, inshallah. Bismillah. So let us begin in earnest with the first feature. The first feature is that the surah starts with inna. Okay. Now this particle adds a type of emphasis, where in the Arabic language you say inna, like you have this in or inna. It adds this emphasis of most certainly, definitely, indeed, without a doubt. Now, what is it saying indeed, without a doubt, is that because it's inna, as we're going to see, that idea of Allah, the one who is granting Al-Kawthar, and we'll see what that means later, is the one of power and majesty and grandeur and greatness and ability and so on. It is emphasizing that. It is our first point of emphasis, our first articulation of emphasis is the inna. Okay, that's number one. Number two, it's also to draw attention to the one that's listening to it. Okay, inna is like, hey, listen, right? Unquestionably, the one who has full power and ownership over all things has given you the abundance. It's to get people's attention. Okay, now it's part of the inna, which is in surely, indeed, we. So it is a first person plural. Now, why is it important that this is stated in inna and not inni? Right? Inni would be indeed, surely, I as one, not in the plural form. So we need to take a step back here for a second. When it comes to this plurality in the Qur'an, this is not referring to a plurality of numbers. And I'm sure many of you have heard or have gotten to this, have understood this explanation, that it's not a plurality of numbers, but rather it's a plurality signifying majesty, signifying grandeur, signifying greatness. And many languages, I think some languages even today still use it. It has fallen out of use in the English language, even though at a certain point, the Queen would walk into the Queen of England would walk into a certain room and said, "Indeed, we have entered." Okay, now that was known in the English language. Unfortunately, now it's fallen into disuse, so it seems a bit obscure to us. But in other languages, including the Arabic language, it is used from this perspective to signify grandeur, to signify royalty, majesty, power, right? If you think about a king or a queen, that they have dominion, they have power, they have, the ability to say, do this, and, they have, people that will do those things for them and so on. And the sense that this is, and how they use that, and how we say that is in the plural form. It's in the first person plural. Okay, I think even in Urdu, for instance, you can say this: "Hum aage," right? We have come, not meaning like me and six of my buddies have come, but meaning like I have entered, but you're kind of signified like hum, like I am this great person who has just entered, right? Maybe a bit arrogant, but nevertheless, right? Hum is cheese ko dekh rahe hain, right? Or we are taking a look at this thing, whatever it might be. Okay, so what is the significance of it here is that remember you had the emphasis, and the emphasis being upon the we, and the we of majesty, of lordship, of dominion, of dominance, of ability, of you know you know having ownership of everything. Okay, why is this important? Is because it's what Allah is going to give the Prophet ﷺ, al Kawthar, which is all of the goodness you can imagine. It comes from a justified plate. In other words, it comes from the one who can give it, and that is Allah, who owns everything. So inna, the first, you could say particle and first person plural signifies this right off the bat. All right, and we're only on the linguistic and linguistic feature 2. Linguistic feature number 3, word choice. So after we've dealt with inna, you look at a'ta, right? The word that's used here, a'tainaka, so the word is a'ta. Now, if you compare this to other words in the Arabic language that also mean to give, you will find that they have a different, there are different nuances that signify how the giving is being done. So, in one or one particular word might signify a type of giving that is rapid and almost mean, right? Like, hey, take that, get out of my face. Okay, you could have other words that signify other layers of meaning. However, when you think about the word a'ta, this particular word is specifically set for this particular context. Why? Because it indicates a hand. It's someone handing over a thing with someone's own hand. So there's a type of intimacy here. There's a type of belonging and connection and love with the person that you're giving it to. Okay. Not only that, but it's coming from someone that has that thing in their possession and their ownership, and they have complete ownership of it, and they're handing it over to you. Okay? So, A, it signifies this type of intimacy. Second, it signifies the one that's able to do that. They're able to give it to you. Okay? Therefore, in the context of this particular surah and this particular ayah specifically, the choice of this a'tayna or a'ta is precise. Any other word, had it been used in this particular context, would not have conveyed the same type of feeling and meaning. Remember, we spoke about this between prose and poetry. It wouldn't convey the same type of feeling or the same type of meaning. Okay, so the choice of word here is emphasizing that of giving, ability, greatness, power, intimacy, all kind of wrapped up into one. Number 4, the fact that this giving is in the past tense. So a'ta here, a'tayna, right? We gave, right? We gave is in the past tense. Why? So this is a feature of the Arabic language, okay? In the sense that because verbs are either in the past tense, they're known as fa'il madi, or they're in the present future tense, fa'il mudari, okay? So what that means is you can have a verb in the past tense, which signifies something that's happening in the past, or a verb that signifies something that's happening right now, or something that will happen in the future. Now, you could say, for instance, the verb for to go somewhere, all right, is dhahaba. So he went. Now, if you want to, that's in the past tense, dhahaba. But if you want to say he is going, you would say yadhabu. But yadhabu could mean he is going right now, or he will be going in the future. Okay? So you have past tense, and then you have present future tense. It could mean now or it could mean in the future. When you express something in the past tense, specifically, what it does, what that entails, is that that particular event has already happened. Okay, now to give an example of this, if you get married, right, or when you get married, and let's say the person is doing your nikah in the Arabic language, okay, and they ask you, do you accept in Arabic? The response that a person gives is qabiltu, like I have accepted in the past tense. You don't say aqbalu, you don't say I'm accepting right now, because that leads to an open door. Okay, so you are accepting now or you accept in the future. Like, which one is it? So now you're in a state of doubt. Like, okay, maybe he's accepting now or maybe he's accepting later. The fact you say qabiltu, it's in the past tense, meaning I've accepted, it's definite, 100%, it's going to happen. Okay, that's it. It's accepted. Done deal. Similarly, a'ta is in the past tense here, meaning that this kauthar, this abundant amount of goodness in every domain you can possibly think of, it has already happened. Again, the fact that it's in the past tense is extremely significant. So why? Because it is expressing a certainty of a promise. It's already happened, right? And here we're talking about the kauthar, but not only that, it also makes sense of divine predetermination. Okay, meaning because it's Allah who, when we understand who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, that according to the qadr of Allah, for Allah, this can already happen, literally, right? So it's already happened and it's certain. Okay, feature number 5. I need to kind of step it up a little bit. A'tainaka, the word a'taina is in the first person plural form. Okay, what does that signify? The na here, a'taina, is again going back to the concept of what we were talking about. We have given you. So inna, indeed, we, given you, we. So it's almost 3 times over that you're having an emphasis on the power, the majesty, the ability, over and over and over again, right? 3 times over. This emphasizing one after the other, it has the rhetorical effect of for the person that is listening to this and internalizing this, to emphasize the idea about who is the one that's doing the giving. It is indeed Allah, who has attributes of majesty and power and dominion and so on. And that repetition of emphasis brings about, again, remember, the state of the Prophet ﷺ was such, one of like sadness, perhaps, despondence, so on, to now one of happiness. What caused the happiness? This overemphasis, this emphasis over and over again, right? Inna, a'tayna, again, right? So yet there's a further emphasis, the fact that it's a'tayna. Okay, al-kawthar. Now, the term kawthar, it's a very fascinating term, right? So this is our 6th feature. The term kawthar is fascinating because it has a number of different meanings, okay? And the semantic implications, testify to the communicative effectiveness of the verse. In other words, I need to stop here for a second. Let me just explain something real quick, because I'm going to be using this word semantics, and we can juxtapose that when we talk about semantics with another term, syntax. Okay, so what do we mean by something that is semantic versus something that is syntactic? Syntax refers to the structure of, let's say, a sentence. Semantics refers to meaning. Okay, so you could have a sentence that is syntactically sound but semantically bankrupt. In other words, it has no meaning. Okay, so I could say syntactically a sound sentence, I am a married bachelor. However, the meaning that conveys, it's pretty much nothing, right? Because you've got two opposite, things, and they're not really so. So this is syntactically sound, I'm a married bachelor, but semantically it is, it is hollow. There's no meaning that's being conveyed here, or a confused meaning that's being conveyed here. So semantically, it's a nightmare. Okay, you could have the opposite. You could have something that is syntactically a nightmare, right? I, Fahad, raining tomorrow, now. Okay, well, now that's syntactically terrible and semantically also terrible. Okay, when we're talking about semantics here, notice that what I've written there is that this word al-kawthar has many layers of meaning with a multitude of semantic implications that enhance the communicative effectiveness of the verse. Al-kawthar is full of layers of meaning. Semantically, it is like a gem. Okay, so what does it refer to? So let's start initially with what it refers to in terms of something that is direct, not directly, but something that's tangible, more or less. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions when talking about what is al-Kawthar, what is Kawthar referring to, he says that it's a river in paradise with abundance of good in it. So the Prophet sallallahu is quoted to have said, "It is a river that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised me. There is an abundance of good in it. It is a fount that my community will gather by on the day of standing, the day of judgment." Okay, so Al Kawthar is the river that Allah has granted. Allah has granted the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it ends in what's known as Al Hawd. And so, just on a side note, on the day of judgment, the Prophet ﷺ will be giving people from the pond, right, which is connected to Al Kawthar, the river, giving people to drink. And any person that drinks from this pond, imagine at the hands of the Prophet ﷺ, any person that drinks from the Hawd, which is being fed from a tributary of Al Kawthar in some narrations, will never thirst again. You will never feel thirsty again, right? So the first definition of Kawthar comes from the Prophet ﷺ, which is that it is a river that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised Prophet ﷺ, and that there is an abundance of good in it. Okay. Now, moving forward, it's not only the actual river itself, but Al-Kawthar is also something that signifies other elements of good. Okay, so one of those, Fakhruddin al-Razi mentions that Al-Kawthar, while it is in addition to the meaning a great river in paradise and bequeathing great abundance, can also mean the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu spiritual progeny. Well, what does that mean? Well, when the Prophet Sallallahu has guided so many people to Islam, okay, like when you guide someone to Islam, whatever good deeds they do, they come into your account, okay, without diminishing any reward for them. So if you guide one person to Islam, like the Prophet ﷺ says, it is better than Humratun Na'am. It is better than the best of camels. In another narration, it is better than the entire world, wa dunya wa ma fiha, right? In the entire world and everything in it. So it's better than all of that to guide one person. So you get all the reward every single time that person does a salah, you get that reward and they get that reward. Every time someone pays zakat, you get that reward, they get that reward. And this is from guiding one person. Now, who guided you? Maybe one person or someone in your family. But at the end, the first person to come with the message was the Prophet. So all of that reward, think about the immense amount of goodness that the Prophet is receiving, right? And we just happen to be one kind of, in that chain. If you happen to be one person, you get the reward of everyone that's guided by you. But then all of that goes back to the Prophet because he's the first. So spiritual, he gets the reward, the goodness, the khair, the reward, the thawab, all of that from what Fakhruddin al-Razi here calls his spiritual progeny. Okay. Now, the triliteral root for this word is from the letters kaf, tha, ra, and it has a number of meanings: to increase in number, to outnumber, to happen frequently, to show pride and wealth, and or children, to be rich, plentiful, abundance, and it means a river. Okay, there are other derivations of this root, including kathura, which means to become a lot, many, kathara, to increase in number or multiply, akthara, to do something great qualities and frequencies, kathratun, multiplicity, abundance, multitude, and akthar, which means more than. So there are a number of different variations or morphological, let's say, variations of the term, the triliteral root kathara. Okay. That being the case, so that was feature 6, the fact that we're talking about al-Kawthar. Feature number 7, and I'm really running short of time here. Thought I could actually cover a lot more, but okay. Feature number 7 is comprehensiveness and perpetuity. All right. Al-Kawthar, again, we're still on the word Kawthar. Al-Kawthar has in front of it, or is prefixed with the alif lam. Now, typically, if you're learning Arabic in the beginning, they always say, oh, the alif lam, it's a definite article which gives something the status of being definite. Okay, so it's much like the THE in English. All right, so you have a man and the man. Okay, but it actually has a greater significance than that. So the word al kauthar is prefixed with a definite article, or definitive article. That's not correct. Definite article, alif lam. Now the what that would mean is that would allow for specification. In other words, you could say a particular thing, right? So if I said ar-rajul, okay, there's rajulun and there's ar-rajulu, that this man, this particular man, the man, now you specified, okay? Whereas rajulun is just a man, right? Whatever, any man. But now you say ar-rajulun, ar-rajulu, excuse me, that this man, right? Hadha rajul, right? This particular man, this specification. However, it can also refer to what I've termed taxonomic comprehensiveness. In other words, it could refer to an entire class of something. Okay, and that's when we talk about taxonomy. It breaks things down into classes. So if we said, for instance, um, uh, al insan, right, or an-nas rather, let's say an-nas, the alif lam, an-nas, humanity, right? So this is an entire class. Ya ayyuhan nas, oh human beings, oh people, oh this class of humanity. So on one hand, it could be for specification. On the other hand, it could be for this type of taxonomical comprehensiveness to refer to an entire class of something. In this particular case, it is referring to the class of goodness. Everything that is good, that is pure, that is just good at its core, it's referring al-kawthar, all of it. So the semantic implication, again, going back to what we talked about semantics, right, versus syntax, semantic implication, the meaning that's conveyed, that kind of digs down and comes to pass, is that everything is good. Al-kawthar. It is like it's all that is good has been given to the Prophet ﷺ. Okay. So, feature number 8. Al-Kawthar is the end of the first ayah. Inna a'tainaka al-Kawthar. Okay. Kawthar, yani Kawthar aish. Like what after Kawthar? Like what? There's no adjective to describe what goodness are we talking about? What is this abundant goodness? What good? What is it? A child? Is it this? Is it that? What goodness is it? The fact that it is left open-ended to such a degree, like it's just basically al-kawthar, inna a'tainaka al-kawthar, it's everything that is good, everything that's just kind of, whatever you can imagine, whatever you can't imagine, the purpose, the intentional finishing of the ayah, conclusion of the ayah here, it is giving a meaning of intentional vagueness, inclusivity, encompassment, and it refers to all. It's fortifying the idea and bolstering the idea that we're talking about everything that is good because it's left open-ended. Okay, that's the 8th feature. The 9th feature, conceptual relatedness, what we call intertextuality. Okay, and by the way, all of this should be tying to our 10-point challenge. Okay, so if you go back, look at the 10-point challenge, we are kind of taking some of those things and we're applying it here. Intertextuality was, I think, point number 3 in our 10-point challenge. Okay. Also, the thing to keep in mind as we're going through these features, we're on feature 9. And if you remember our movement and our migration from some idea that is dhanni, right, probabilistic, to something that's qat'i, that is definitive, absolute, like there's no doubt about it. As we start adding more and more features, the point is we're moving from a state of being dhanni to a state that's qat'i, a state of knowing something probabilistically or establishing something probabilistically to one that is absolute and certain. As more and more evidence comes about, you find that this becomes more and more difficult to do. Just keep that framework in mind that we spoke about earlier. So, فَصَلِّ لِرَبِّكَ وَانْحَرْ. All right, so the fa here, the fa particle, it means so. So therefore, so then, okay? So what is this doing now? Number 1, it is linking salah, right? And it's linking blessing and gratitude. So if Allah has given you all of these, has given you everything that's good, right? Inna a'tainaka al-kawthar. Okay, so what should be the reaction? What should be the action that's involved in this, that's linking this? You have this blessing, be grateful. So now there's then obviously the natural link to say, okay, this, therefore this. However, how does this particular ayah tie in with the overall general narrative of our text that surpasses 27,000 words? In other words, the rest of the Quran. What you find that is mentioned throughout the entire Quran that's interweaved, every single page, is some element related to Tawheed, which is the oneness. And here it is Tawheed of lordship, meaning that Allah is, that He is capable, He is knowing, He is all of those elements that we talk about, right? He is Al-Khaliq, Al-Malik, Al-Mudabbir, all of these things. Remember, in the first ayah, inna refers to power and abundance and dominion and so on and so forth. All of that lordship, now it's being linked to worship. And this concept of, like lordship being linked to worship. In other words, Allah is your Lord, therefore worship Him. Allah is your Lord, therefore worship Him. Allah is your Lord, therefore worship Him. This second ayah brings this together and connects it with the rest of the Quran. Okay? So it ties with the rest of the Quran by linking lordship with worship. And it also gives a type of juxtaposition. In other words, you have your Lord, which is a Rabb. You can have your Lord, which is your Rabb, and you can juxtapose that with their other idols, false idols. So remember, you have this abundance of goodness. Part of that goodness comes from Allah, the one who is true, Al-Haq, and so on and so forth. And what is it that, how are you juxtaposing this with what comes before it? Well, they're worshiping false deities, and your worship is to your Lord who is true. Okay, so conceptual related to this. And of course, you'll notice that there are elements of this throughout the Quran. I've just mentioned one here. قُلْ إِنَّ صَلَاتِي وَنُسُكِي وَمَحْيَا وَمَمَاتِي لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. Say, my prayers, my sacrifice, my life, my death are all for Rabbul Alameen, Rabbil Alameen. He has no partners. La sharika lah. وَبِذَلِكَ أُمِرْتُ وَأَنَا أَوَّلُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. And so indeed, this is what I'm commanded. I'm the first to devote myself to Him. Again, linking that idea or tying that idea with other places in the text, that intertextuality. Okay, let's move on with the 10th feature. And I'm looking at the time, but let's keep going, inshallah. The 10th feature. And that is the use of the word Rabb. Why use the word Rabb here? Why not say Khaliq? Why not say Allah? Right? There is a certain intentional reason that it's used by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? That has to do with why Rabb, and specifically Rabbuk, right? Your Lord, that's used. Okay? So first, let's understand what we mean by Rabb. And Rabb comes from the triliteral, Ra, Ba, Ba. Okay, and it has the following meanings. It means master. It means Lord. It means owner, guardian, right? So when you think of Rububiyyah, it signifies, that there's Khalq, there's Mulk, and there's Tadbir, right? There's the creation, the one that created everything. There is the one who manages everything. And there's one that has dominion. He's the owner of everything. Rabb includes all of that. But not only that, it also includes the idea of to bring about, to pamper, to raise, to educate. All of these concepts are tied with the identification marker of Allah being Rabb. Okay? So it includes creation. It includes power. It includes ability, because it presupposes all of that in a sense. And its meaning, Lord, Master, Owner, Guardian, to have possessions, to have dominion over everything, to own everything, it includes pampering and nurturing and all of these things. Okay. That's why when you are talking about how to raise a child, you talk about the concept of tarbiyah. Tarbiyah comes from the same triliteral root, right? Ra, ba, ba. You're trying to raise your child in a way that's loving and caring and nurturing. And maybe sometimes, it can be a bit, you may be a bit strict, whatever it might be. But the point is that you're talking about nurturing and raising. Here, it's specifically suited because remember the sabab al-nuzul. Remember the reason for revelation is that it is to show that like you've been given al-Kawthar from the one that has power and majesty and so on and so forth. Okay, who is the one that's giving it to? It is your Rabb, right? It is the one who is going to nurture you and bring you up, develop you, and so on. Okay, so perfect choice of a. So let's tie that now to our 11th feature, and that is what is known as we'll call it grammatical shift. And these grammatical shifts are called iltifat. Okay, a grammatical shift is something that is it's well known in the Arabic language of the Quran itself, in the sense that it has a number of features to it. Right, it's a rhetorical device, and it's a strategy that is employed throughout the Quran in many different contexts, in many different places in the Quran, and it's very powerful. Right? Typically, when we think about compositions that we bring about as human beings, a rhetorical shift, or a grammatical shift rather, might be a bit of a problem. You might think, okay, well, if you're in first person, you should keep your entire essay and sentence or whatever consistent, right? Because it shows consistency. And in this case, it shows that there's now a shift. Now, the shift itself has what you may call rhetorical value, right? Has rhetorical weight. Iltifat can happen in a number of different scenarios. Now, it can be a change in person. So going from let's say first person to second person to third person, right? It could be from I to you to him, right? First, second, third. It could be a number. So you could have you could be like in Arabic, they have three, you have a plural, a dual, and a singular, a dual, and a plural, right? So you can, whereas English, we have a singular and a plural, right? So that shift in number, that can also be part of a change that has rhetorical value, right? Rhetorical significance. And you can talk about tense and case mark and other examples of iltifat. One of the iltifat is found here in this particular particular ayah. So it moves from the inna to the rabbika. Okay, so it's changed from the first person plural we to the second person your Lord. What does this change signify? It's change. The change signifies, and it highlights the intimate relationship between God and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, first it starts with inna. Right? So remember the first ayah, inna a'tainaka al-kawthar fasalli li rabbika. So went from we, that majestic plural, highlighting what? There's power, there's majesty, there's ability. That's is signified by the we. It shifts to this idea of closeness, right? Rabbuk, right? Your Lord, right? And not just your creator, right? It's your Rabb. Remember, we just in feature number 10, we talked about the word Rabb itself, but now your love, your Lord. Okay? So it moves from we to your. Okay, now this grammatical shift, it is there. Remember, the purpose of the chapter is to console the Prophet ﷺ. And this grammatical shift plays right into that. It comes right where it hits right where it's supposed to hit. And so going back to the narration, it was narrated to the Prophet ﷺ that despite the suffering endured by the loss of his son, he raised his head after a nap and smiled. Okay? I want you to think about and internalize what this would mean for someone in this situation. Okay? And what this grammatical shift, the amazing emotive, psycho-spiritual impact it would have to go from we, power and majesty, to that closeness, right? Rabbik, right? Your Lord. What that means. So he wakes up, the Prophet ﷺ, just now this chapter was revealed to me. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Inna a'tayna kal kawthar ila al-akhiri. So moving on. Word choice. One har. And I'm at number 12. And time is of a premium. So let's try to move as fast as we can. One har. All right. The word is from the trilateral root nahara, and it has the following meaning. So it means the chest, the upper part of the chest, the throat, to slaughter, to strive, to pour down heavily. This particular phrase, or this particular word rather, that's used, it signifies sacrificing an animal, but it also means to stand in prayer. And it also means to raise one's hand in prayer, reciting the takbir, saying Allahu Akbar. Okay? All of this comes under one har, right? Or anhar. Okay. Now, the reason why this word is specific and perfect here is because of the multiple layers. So while you have the kuffar, they would sacrifice their animals to idols, we sacrifice our animals to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We stand in prayer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah is the greatest. All of these, one har, is what's captured in this word. Again, we're going to go back to feature number 13, which is emphasis. We've already talked about this. Inna, it's just the same thing, except now, instead of highlighting the power and majesty of Allah, it is emphasizing the fact that the kuffar who are making fun of the Prophet ﷺ, who are denigrating the Prophet ﷺ, had been cut off. So in the first case, inna, indeed, certainly, most certainly, that emphasis, Allah, the one who has power and ability and dominion. Here, indeed, certainly, no doubt, they're the ones that are cut off. Okay. Shaniyaka, your hater. The word shaniyaka is derived from the trilateral root sheen, noon, hamza. Okay. And what does this mean? It means to hate, to abhor. It's a type of hatred, ugliness, evildoers. It's hatred towards that which has a type of ugliness or people that are evil. It's a hatred mixed with enmity and evilness of disposition. Okay. So you might hate something, but there's a certain type of hate that is directed towards something that is evil in its disposition. It has a degree of negativity to it. It has a degree of animosity. There's animosity towards you, and there's enmity towards you. Okay? That is where this trilateral root, right? Sheen, Nun, Hamza, that is this type of hatred. There are other words that are used for hatred in the Quran. For instance, karaha, right? From kaf, ra, ha, sorry, means to cause to be hated, to be loathed, to be disliked. This is so. Let's take a couple of ayat to elucidate this point and try to see what the difference is and why shani here that's used is a word choice that is right on point. Okay, so in the fifth chapter, fifth surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu kunu qawamina lillahi shuhada bil qist. O you who have believed, be persistently standing firm for Allah, witnesses for justice. وَلَا تَجْرِمَنَّكُمْ شَنَآنُ قَوْمٍ عَلَىٰ أَلَّا تَعْدِلُوا. All right, and so do not let the hatred of a people, and here, what is the term that's used? Shana'anu, right? The hatred of a people. The same triliteral root that's used. So you may have a people that are evil, that have an evil disposition. But even that, what Allah here is saying is, even if they have an evil disposition, that doesn't give you the right to be unjust towards them, even if they have an evil disposition towards them. That's why shana'ana, right? Shana'anu, qawman is used here, okay? Because it could be that they are evil. They're bad people. They may be non-Muslims or whatever, have anti-Muslim bigotry or whatever it might be. But that should not negate you being just, okay? Now, let's look at the other form of the word to hate, which is, right, there's a karaha, right, a kariha, right? By the way, the word makruh comes from there, that which is hated by Allah, right? In terms of the jurisprudential rulings. Okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Kutiba alaykumul qital. Indeed, fighting, or rather, fighting has been enjoined upon you, has been prescribed upon you. وَهُوَ كُرْهٌ لَكُمْ Kur. It is hated to you. Now, the fighting itself, is that something in and of itself evil? Well, the rest of the ayah actually elucidates that. It tells you that no, it's not. Why? Because it is good for you, right? Because Allah says, that you hate this command to fight, right? Like, who wants to go out, go to war, fight? Well, وَهُوَ كُرٌ لَكُمْ, right? Like, you hate it. But then that fighting in and of itself is not evil. Why? Because Allah then continues and says, وَعَصَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُ شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. It may be something that is hated to you, but it's good for you. So here, that karaha, that thing that you hate, in fact, it's good, right? وَعَصَىٰ أَن تُحِبُّوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ شَرٌ لَكُمْ. And it may be something that you love a thing and it's bad for you. وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. And so we see that karaha, kariha, has a different meaning. Going back to the term, which we said, your hater, it is perfectly suited here. Why? Because the one that's making fun of the Prophet ﷺ, the one that's mocking the Prophet ﷺ by saying that you're cut off, the hatred, right? That hater is evil in and of themselves. They're evil, right? From the first point that they are, going against the Prophet ﷺ. So again, the word choice. Allah is not using any other word for hater except one that has this particular hatred mixed with enmity and evilness of disposition. Okay. Let's move on. Word choice number 15, and we're almost done, inshallah. Al-abtar, right? Abtar. The use of the word al-abtar is most suitable as a word used by the enemies of the Prophet ﷺ. So first of all, this was a word that Al-As ibn Wa'il used against the Prophet ﷺ. Okay, so it comes from batara, trilar root. It means he cut or cut off a thing before it was complete. He cut or cut off in any manner. He cut off a tail or something, like entirely. It means not only a physical type of cutting off, but it means cutting off in such a way that you are completely destitute. You have like no hope. Everything is done. You are like just in such a state that everything has been cut off. It's just you're cut off from everything. Specifically in this case, it also means cut off with no male descendants. Okay. It can broadly also mean he made him to be cut off without any offspring or progeny. And it also signifies suffering a type of loss. Okay, so all of these meanings come under abata. All right. And so it's suited here because it is a response to Al-Asim ibn Wa'il and others that had said that the Prophet is abatar, because now Allah is saying that they are the ones that are abatar. Okay. However, that's not only that's the 16th feature is that there's also alif lam here. Now, going back to what we said about alif lam, that it's a definite article typically, right? So we said a versus the. So it's used for specification, right? And confinement, exclusivity. We mentioned that. And remember, I said there was a taxonomic comprehensiveness, the entire class of something. Okay. In this context, it is talking about al-abtaru, right? Like this specific person or this particular thing. Now, what it's referring to is that it's not the Prophet ﷺ that's cut off, but only this particular person that is cursing at the Prophet ﷺ. So in this case, it's talking about a specification, al-abtar. Okay, it's a confinement exclusivity here. All right, but it's not only that. It's not only the alif lam that has an emphasis. There's also the pronoun huwa. Huwa al-abtar is what's used, right? So huwa here is saying that this person, Allah could have said, this person is abtar, right? Or al-abtar, the one who is cut off. But he says, huwa al-abtar, it's adding more emphasis. Now pause here for a second. When we're talking about emphasis, remember emphasis has a semantic value. To emphasize something more than once has a semantic value. It adds to the meaning. Maybe not in the sense that, sometimes say like, why would you say the same thing over and over again? But even in that emphasis, the shades of that emphasis are what signify deeper meaning. So it's emphasizing and then emphasizing again and then emphasizing over again. Okay. So indeed, indeed, your hater, he is cut off. The huwa is the emphasis here. Okay. All right. Now, like we said about Al-Kawthar, that nothing comes after it. Similarly, in this last ayah, inna shaniyaka huwa al-abtar, nothing comes after abtar. All right. Why is that significant? Because just like in Al-Kawthar, the fact that it stops there, it is indicative of everything that's good. Because you could say Al-Kawthar, like what amongst this goodness? What all this great abundant goodness, what amongst it? There's no adjective that describes it. Okay, well, what it's left open. Here, abatar is to cut off from what? Everything. Everything that's good, it's cut off. So just like that, it's almost like it's having an opposite effect because of the term itself, abatar. You're cut off from everything. So that sense that you get in the beginning, the vastness, the abundance, everything that is good, here, abatar, everything gone, cut, it's gone. There's nothing left, right? So the vastness of goodness, sense of unlimitedness in the first verse, that is cut off completely. So there's nothing that comes after abatar. Okay. All right, let's look at specificity and generality. This is our 19th feature. The chapter does not mention the one who insulted the Prophet ﷺ by name. Therefore, even though it said al-abatar, but anyways, we'll get to that. Therefore, it applies to anyone who attempts to denigrate the Prophet ﷺ. So because a name specifically is not applied to this particular person here, right? Even though, we do know in another surah where one of the detractors of the Prophet ﷺ is mentioned, okay? In this case, it's not. So in other words, it would apply to anyone who attempts to denigrate the Prophet ﷺ, okay? It doesn't mention any details, any description of, let's say in this case, Al-As ibn Wa'il at all. So there's no particular details. So in this case, it's specific. In other words, the one who insulted the Prophet ﷺ or insults the Prophet ﷺ and his general, to all those who insult the Prophet ﷺ. And Fakhruddin Arazi mentions him only by description, not by name. So to be inclusive of anyone like him or who plots against the true deen. Okay. Feature number 20. Semantically orientated repetition and rhythm. Remember what our discussion was on semantics versus syntax. We said semantics is related to meaning. What's interesting here is when you look at the repetition and rhythm, and you link that with what sort of significance it has in terms of the meaning that's conveyed. Okay, so we have up there, the Qur'an has been described as an inimitable symphony whose rhymes moves men to tears and ecstasy. The Qur'an not only selects the most apt words and phrases, but also achieves a unique sound with a unique literary structure. So here we're talking about auditory sensation and pleasure, and that's linked with meaning, which is what gives it semantic force. It adds to its semantic force. Okay, let me give an example to make this clear. When you think when you go to Surah Al-Fatiha, in Surah Al-Fatiha, the two names related to the mercy of Allah are Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim. Ar-Rahman is on a verb form, which is the fa'alan form. Now, the fa'alan form signifies something that is heavy and overbearing. So you can think of yourself, like with huge waves in an ocean that are overbearing and coming upon you. So when you hear when we read Ar-Rahman, this is the idea that mercy is like overbearing waves upon waves upon waves. It's a fullness. There's so much of it quantitatively. It's just like, oh my gosh, or the quantity. It's just, it's a lot of mercy. Rahim is in what's known as the fa'il form. Fa'il signifies that which has longevity. It happens over a long period of time. It's permanent. It's a type of signifying permanence. All right, fa'il form. right? So for instance, tawil is on the same form, someone who's tall. So someone who's tall one day is not tall one day, short the next, and tall the next. It's pretty much you're tall. That's your permanent state. Okay. Um, so Rahim, Ar-Rahim, it's the mercy that is consistent. Now, why am I mentioning this? Because I was talking about auditory sensation and pleasure connected with meaning. When you recite Ar-Rahman, there's a fullness that arises, which is like that fullness and overbearing, mercy. It's a fullness. Ar-Rahman, there's a fullness there. However, when you recite Ar-Rahim, there's an elongation. Ar-Rahim. Okay, now I've done a little bit of hyperbole there, but you get the point. That elongation is something of permanence. So you see how the auditory sensation and how you experience that auditory sensation is linked with the meaning, which enhances the semantic force. The same is true here. Why? Because you have the repetition of the letter kaf. In other words, it's saying you 3 times, but how you hear it. Inna a'tainaka al-kawthar fasalli li rabbika wanhar inna shani'aka huwa al-abtar. So you hear that kaf 3 times. It's singling out and focusing and making exclusive to the Prophet. That ka, the auditory sensation is linking it to the meaning. Okay, so the rhythm generated by the repetitive use of the ka is semantically orientated, as the emphatic use of the second person to exclusively the Prophet. The Prophet is responsible for the rhythm. Okay, rhyme. How are we doing on time? All right, I think I have like 4 minutes. So I'm going to try to rush through this, inshallah. All right. Okay, so let's go on to rhyme. Obviously, there's a rhyming scheme that each ayah ends with. Inna a'tainaka al-kawthar fasalli li rabbika wanhar inna shani'aka huwa al-abtar. So the thar, har, tar, all of that rhymes with this. But it's not only that it's a rhyme, but remember, it's the rhyme and the meaning that's connected. So all of these things that we've spoken about, the word choice, the semantic force in terms of the auditory sensation and pleasure and all these things, all of that happens with a rhyme that's now added to this. This is the 21st feature. Okay, 22nd feature, semantically oriented rhyme. Okay, what's interesting, so from a previous point, it's clear that the chapter has a rhyme. Okay, that's feature number 22. However, when someone wants a poem or a work of prose to have a rhyming scheme, there is usually a playoff between meaning and rhyme. If you ever think about how like rap music is composed, you're never going to have the apex and the most effective way of delivering information in the form of, let's say, a rap song. Okay, you're going to have to give and take, right? Either you're going to have to sacrifice rhyme or you're going to have to sacrifice meaning. It's next to impossible to have something stated exactly as you want it and have it rhyme, precisely. Okay, so what is fascinating is that this chapter does not only have a rhyme, its rhyme is created with the most relevant and apt words. Okay, and so we see the features that we saw before that. Okay, the words used are only, okay, we'll get to that later, inshallah. 23. Now, all of this has been a very interesting conversation. And we're speaking about the literary, the rhetorical devices, the literary linguistic features, and that's great. But it's not just limited to the internal, let's say, structure of the surah itself. It's not just that, okay, you've got the 3 verses, you've got these things, and the word choice, and that in and of itself, that is amazing. Okay, in and of itself, you would say that the challenge is met, right? Maybe like 3 or 4, 3 or more features ago, right? When we're thinking about that what I was talking about, moving from dhanni to qat'i. Okay, but not only that, these ayat have a connection with reality. So I have up there verse, which has a meaning, which has a connection with reality. Okay. An interesting observation of this chapter is that it is also factual and accurate. All right. It's not just fluff, that's some sort of poetic musings of a person, but rather it ties with reality. Okay, so when the chapter was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ was at the lowest point of his life. His enemies, right, perhaps including Al-As ibn Wa'il, were at the apex of their prosperity and power. However, what happens in reality? All of this changes. The Prophet ﷺ becomes the most successful prophet, both as a man delivering a divine message and a statesman. And what happens to all of those who were denigrating the Prophet ﷺ? They lose all their power. All right. Now, in addition to that, who is the one that is the most remembered, the most loved, the most praised person on earth? You don't find Al-As ibn Wa'il's life recorded in any, with any measure comparing to the Prophet ﷺ. You went to a random non-Muslim, there's a good chance if you told them, do you know about the Prophet Muhammad? They may know, yes, so he has something to do with Islam. If you told, hey man, do you know Al-As ibn Wa'il? Do you know Ka'b ibn al-Ashraf? Do you know Uqba ibn Mu'ayt? Like, they'd be like, what does that even mean, man? I don't know who that is. Like, they're pretty much unknown. But the Prophet ﷺ, like, it's becoming a reality now, right? So it's not that there's just an internal cohesiveness. There's the grammatical linking of all the ayat and the words and the word choice and all the things that we're talking about, but it also links with the reality on the ground, the reality that is outside of the surah itself. Okay. All right. Number 24, feature number 24 has a unique structure. All right. Now, this is perhaps the one that's the most fun. So I'll try to cover this as quickly as I can. So, Inna a'tainaka al-kawthar fasalli li rabbika wanhar inna shani'aka wal abtar. This chapter has 10 lexical items. So, again, let's understand what a lexical item is. A lexical item refers to a word or chain of words that make up the building blocks of a text or a language. So, for example, if you say "I love you," it's 3 words, but 1 lexical item. The words "I am not" are 3 words, all right, but 1 lexical item. In the context of Arabic, it can be a word with a linguistic particle or preposition. So, a linguistic item is like this, inshallah. Okay, this chapter has 10 linguistical items. What are they? Inna, which is 1. A'tainaka, number 2. Al-Kawthar. Okay, that's number 3. Fasalli, so pray. Li rabbika, number 5. Li rabbika wanhar, number 6. Okay. Inna, the 7th linguistic what was I saying? The second lexical item, excuse me. The 7th lexical item, inna, indeed. Shaniaka, 8th lexical item. Huwa, 9th lexical item. Al-abtar, the 10th. Remember when we started the challenge, right? So we said, all right, pick 10 phrases. So we have 10 lexical items. All right. Interestingly enough, the whole chapter has used 10 letters only once. Now, if you analyze this, and let me just stop here for a second. When you think, and let's take a kind of a macro view of what we're talking about for a second before we get to the micro counting the letters. What was the linguistic environment? The linguistic environment in which the Qur'an is coming is not an environment that is heavy or where writing and reading is something that is widespread, right? The environment is not burgeoning with people who can read and write. In fact, it's the opposite. When it comes to reading and writing, the environment is a bit emaciated. There's not that many people that can read and write. Very few people can read and write. When you think about the process, how you go from something you're saying to writing something, you're giving a sign that's written to the sound that you're saying. So it's like you're putting a symbolism down, or not a symbol down to signify what you're saying. That process of writing something, in fact, is a type of archaic technology. It enhances how you're able to engage with the language. If you don't have it, then your engagement with language is going to be quite different. Your experience of the language is going to be different. Okay. Remember, The Prophet ﷺ doesn't know how to read or write, right? He doesn't have that skill, and yet it comes with an interest. It comes with, and this relates to our uh, our 24th feature, and that is that it has 10 letters that are used only once. Okay, so what are these 10 letters? Okay, used only once, meaning once in the entire surah. So it's not the hamza, right? It's not the noon. It is the ain. So there's nowhere else in this surah that the ain is used. Ta is only used once. Nowhere else is it used. The ya, this is a very popular letter. You think it has to be used more than once in the surah, not used anywhere else in the surah. The tha, ko, thara, right? Tha, used only once. Fa, used only once. Sad, right? Fasalli, right? Used again only once. The ha, one har, again used only once. The sheen here, shaniya, is used only once. The ha in the huwa is used only once. And finally, the ta in abatar is used only once. How many are there? 10. So 10 lexical items, 10 letters that are used only once. All right. Unique words. This is the 25th feature. All right. So what are the unique words? Kawthar. While different morphological variants of this word are used in the Quran, and specifically 167 times, the only time it's used in this form as a noun, which is used only once as a noun, and that's here, al-Kawthar, number one. Wanhar, right? Nahara, anhara, which is in the verb one first form, verb form one, for those of you who use the Hand's Weird Dictionary. Anhar, it's only used in this form. Sorry, it occurs only once in the Quran in the form one verb. Shaniyaka occurs 3 times. Shaniya, like in this, the triliteral root occurs 3 times. The only place it is shani is here, right? Shaniya occurs once here. And finally, abtar only occurs once in the Quran, and that's here. So these 4 words only occur in Surah Al-Kawthar. All right. Now, I'm going to briefly run through the semantic mirroring of the previous chapter, and then kind of conclude with the 27th. So the previous chapter is Surah Ma'un, chapter 107. When you break this down, you look at Surah Al-Ma'un, أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي يَدْعُ الْيَتِيمِ إِلَى الْآخِرِ. So when you break it down, you see, wrong way. You see that the hypocrites are described in the following way. They're stingy, verse 2 and 3. They abandon their prayers, 4 and 5. They are insincere, verse 6. They do not give people their rights. When you mirror that, you find that they're the overabundance of goodness that negates tight-fisted stinginess, verse 1. It's mirroring the stinginess here. In other words, it's the opposite of that. He established his prayers. Again, they abandoned their prayers. He is sincere in doing this for your Lord. They are insincere. Okay. They don't give people their rights. He gives sacrifices, which includes doing good and sacrificing animals, and give charity to the needy, the rights. The chapter ends by implying the true belief in the Prophet will outlast the showmanship of his haters. Verse number 3. The Quranic challenge to mimic Al-Kawthar is not simply a challenge to compose 3 lines. And of course, we're talking about the previous 25 features we mentioned. Rather, a challenge to convey 7 lines of imagery, in other words, Surah Al-Ma'un, and information in 3 lines without any loss in meaning. So the mirroring is happening not 3 to 3, but it's 7 to 3, and the mirroring still happens. Last but not least, feature number 27, that the lessons you derive. So all of this is not just empty kalam. It's not kalam fadi. It's just not just for, there's a purpose to all of this. And this purpose has to do with teaching certain lessons. So while someone could say, okay, maybe this is only for the Prophet, no, in fact, it's not. In fact, it has universal, timeless lessons that are trans-historical. They span throughout time. Okay? So although this chapter was specifically revealed to console and advise the Prophet, there are universal, timeless lessons. What are some of them? To be grateful for the abundance of blessings we have. When you look at blessings, you'll always find that you have more than you can even count. In tu'uddu ni'matallah la tuhsuha. You will never be able to count these blessings. And when you do that, you should focus on gratitude which is something that has ramifications on your psycho-spiritual and emotive state. Okay? Without gratitude, you can't really reach that state. To pray to God and sacrifice, give charity, to help others. Expressing gratitude facilitates the state of being grateful. Doing good and helping others serves as a way to better increase our well-being. Leave the haters to God. And I love this one, right? We must realize that they're cut off from blessings, right? Someone comes to you, they got this, they have all sorts of hatred. That's in the hands of Allah. They're already cut off. If they're going to now curse at the Prophet, if they're going to curse at you, they're going to, downplay your deen and so on and so forth. They're going to make fun of you. As they say in English, let the haters hate. All right. Now, I've kind of rushed through the last few, but let me just stop here. It's 1:10, and I can do another 5 minutes, and then we can do another 5 minutes just for Q&A. And I was initially thinking that we would go till 1. It's 1:10. So if anyone has any questions, please go ahead and post those questions, and I'll try to take them. That being the case, while I wait, if there are any questions, I'm going to again refer you, going all the way back, to, let's see if I can find the slide, to the article. This is it. Let me see here. Nope. To the article that this presentation was based upon, this seminar was based upon. And where is it? Oh, there it is. So if hopefully you benefited from some of this, inshallah. If you did, I'm highly recommending you go to sapiensinstitute.org /essays and articles. You can find this article there with a lot more detail and references, inshallah. So any questions before we conclude today? Unless everyone has already taken off, because that was super long. Can you break down Variant Qur'an's channel? I'm assuming Variant Qur'an is a channel. I guess, inshallah. Okay. Wayakum. Let me see if there are some questions that. So there was a question: is Ustadh Hamza in this? Well, no. Okay, anyone else? All right, let's see. Can this be part of a cumulative case argument, scientific miracles, or is this the essential miracle? Yeah, there's a number of problems claiming scientific miracles. Just a simple way of thinking about it is, remember the term miracles and i'jaz. Okay, i'jaz is to completely incapacitate. It's a challenge, and that's why the first section of this presentation I spent quite a bit of time on us distinguishing between miracles and a challenge. Here in this case, the challenge is linguistic and literary, and that's why it's important to understand that i'jaz is hyper focused on this. When we talk about scientific miracles, I mean, one of the problems is that, can it really be offered as a challenge that's irrefutable, that completely incapacitates someone? And you could make the argument that it doesn't, not because of a problem with the Quran, but because of how, or because of the problem of how philosophy, or the philosophy of science works, or how science itself works, the mechanics and methodology of science, right? That science is a mutable endeavor. So in trying to use it as a tool, it becomes very problematic to say, okay, we can incapacitate, your explanation of the Quran, or your understanding the Quran is not from Allah, by way of science, because science itself is mutable and the Quran is not mutable, right? And there's, I think, a good article on this that Hamza has written as well. I don't know if it's on the Sapient site, but it is definitely part of the Divine Reality book. And I think there's some more work that's coming out talking about how we can use science related to a multi-leveled and multi-layered approach of the Quran. So you'll notice even in this presentation, there were words that had various meanings, and the accommodation of those meanings was something quite remarkable, right? And so when you're thinking about scientific facts and how human understanding, develops and in a sense progresses, I'm a bit hesitant using progresses, but anyhow, as human understanding progresses, that it can match various understandings of the human being, right? And there's an ayah in the Quran, interestingly, that kind of signifies this, and that is sanurihim ayatina fil afaq wa fi anfusihim. We will show them our signs in the cosmos and in themselves. The verb to see is preceded by a seen, which what that means is, remember we said the verbs have a past tense and a present future tense. When you add the word seen or the letter seen, it converts that present future tense only to present tense. So therefore, every time you read this ayah, sanurihim, we will show, you will always be seeing things or seeing signs in the cosmos and in yourself, right? Because science as an endeavor, there's always discovery. You don't complete, right? You don't come to an end. You're always, observation is becoming more and more sophisticated, is becoming enhanced. So you're able to discover different things, and you can go through paradigm shifts, right? So that's, I don't know if that helped out for Brother Irfan, your question, inshallah. Okay. So that being the case, I'm going to go ahead and stop here. Jazakumullah khair. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all of you, taking out your time. I know this presentation, this seminar was a bit long, but it was marketed as a seminar. So that being the case, we kind of knew upfront it would be long. Also, if there was any sort of lacking on my behalf in reflecting the article, the essay itself, now that's all from me. The article itself is quite good. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward Hamza, jazahullah khair, and reward him for his efforts. I really, one of the things that makes me very sad is that, that he spent a lot of time on this, put this out for us, and, people aren't really engaging with it, or people may not engage with it. So one of the purposes of this seminar was also to get people to read the article for themselves, to look at the references. There's more in the article, by the way, in the sense that there are also contentions that come up. What could people possibly say to argue against the case that we've made, that the haddi, the challenge that's been brought forth? That's also the article. I didn't get to talk about that. So, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward Hamza, keep him steady, keep him sincere. Go to the website, read the article. It is going to be worth your time, and read it with the intention to benefit and benefit others. Bi'idhnillah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward all of you, give you the best of this life and the best of the afterlife. May He allow all of us to reach al-hawd, that pond, and drink from the Prophet ﷺ, drink from the pond, so that none of us ever thirst again, and that we may enter Jannah and Jannat al-Firdaus, the highest station of paradise. Someone asked a question. Please let us know which translation of the Quran is being used here. I will refer you to the article, inshallah. So go to the article. I believe it is mentioned in there, if I'm not mistaken. If not, I guess we'll have to take a look at that, inshallah. But all the references are in the article. Jazakumullah khair. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.